I'm going to take you through the game between Levon Aronian and Fabiano Caruana from round 8 of Norway Chess. Both these players have had a bit of an up and down time in the tournament, but you know, they're always up for a fight, and this was a really good fight. Remember, if you want to subscribe to the channel, click on the button below, and if you want to support us, there are links to PayPal and Patreon.com. Right, on with this game, Levon Aronian with the white pieces, and this opening is very interesting because it's a repeat of the line that Magnus Carlsen played against Caruana in their World Championship match. Typical Carlsen. He likes a blocked centre, a centre with fixed pawn structure, and it's almost as though he's playing with the black pieces here. It reminds me of, you know, the Sicilians he was playing with black against bishop b5. And it's a clever idea. And if you remember, in one of the playoff games, Fabiano castled and then knight e2 protected that knight. So Caruana this time, he took on c3. And if this is taken, well, white can recover the pawn very easily with queen here and take here, for example. But d6, so black sets up solid pawn chain. And now white has to deal with this threat. Now, Carlsen subsequently played this in several games. For example, against Karyakin in Abidjan. He played it against Anand in the Grenka tournament, and he also played it in St. Petersburg as well at the end of 2018. And Carlsen's version is just to play f3 here, and then to shift this knight to f2, for example, like this. And, well, against Karyakin, he succeeded in eventually pushing forward with f4. So that's f3 here. Let's have a look at what Levon does. He played queen c2 to guard this pawn, and then put the knight on f3. Well, it's a slightly different way of playing, but absolutely fine. Fabiano played bishop e6. And now Levon did something a little bit peculiar because he wasn't consistent with his plan. I thought that in playing knight f3, he might be plotting to go knight h4 with a potential idea of putting that knight on f5, or even maybe dropping back and manoeuvring it around to e3. But anyway, the knight going to h4, I thought this was the big idea. But instead he played knight g5, knocking the bishop back, and then went f3. So it's a kind of modified Carlsen system, because of course this knight hasn't got any future on g5. It had to go back. But it seems to me that, well, white hasn't particularly gained anything by putting the queen on c2, and black has been able to get counterplay going on the queen side. So in advancing this a pawn, it means that it's not so easy to protect that pawn. Well, of course you can protect it with b3 at some moment, but it basically, lines are going to open, so black automatically has counterplay. Okay, let's see how this works out in practice. So knight c6, and then the knight spins to a5. Got to be careful here with black. If bishop e6, then f4 could be worrying with this typical plan of advancing to f5 and then a pawn storm with g4, etc. And if this is exchanged to get counterplay for black in the middle, then rook g1. And this is dangerous, let's put it like that. I'm sure black is alright, but I wouldn't like to meet that. But instead, Caruana, I think quite cannily, left that bishop on d7 so that if f4 comes, well, there's no threat to play f5. You can exchange basically and get counterplay on the e file a lot quicker, for example. knight a5. So this starts the process of getting counterplay by attacking this pawn. So this is all very sensible. Now, I mean, I think if white plays knight d1 and puts the knight on e3, I don't think there's too much wrong with white's position. But I mean, I think black has decent counterplay. Maybe, as Caruana pointed out, he would look to spin this knight round here to attack that pawn. But, you know, white is going to be able to defend that by playing rook b1 and then b3. But it's just a balanced position. But Levon instead played b4 straight away. Just he didn't want to mess around. But that means that after this exchange, that then the queen side has opened a little bit. I mean, not to white's detriment, but it just means that it's not really possible to launch some kind of kingside attack for white, because of course there's always going to be counterplay on the a file. So, I mean, if white wanted to play a safe continuation, you could simply exchange here and castle kingside, and I think it's about equal, basically. I mean, black can't really make anything of the a file, but the sort of continuing presence there at least prevents white from playing too actively. But Levon played quite a risky move, really, ceding the open file to black. Not that there's an entry point on the a file, but still, you never know. The time might come. Bishop e6, but I think that shows, you know, the aggressive intent of Levon. And here f4, well, this one is a little bit different because I think black's counterplay is, well, again, particularly with potential later on to attack down here. You know, this is a very different situation. After king h8, just nudging out of the way, yeah, hard to see how white is going to break through. So back to this position. So Levon played knight d1 to shift the knight to e3. Potentially. Here Caruana already thought he was a little bit better. And the reason he thought that was because he's going to be able to get it d5. When that happens, look at white's kingside pawns. You see, it would be much better in this situation if we could cheat and just nudge those pawns back on the second rank, and then white's king would be perfectly safe. And black could still play d5, but basically it wouldn't have the same effect. But in this position, with these pawns here, you can see the second rank is open, and this diagonal is open, and potentially, if the position breaks open, then f3 could be a little bit weak. I know this is very intangible at the moment, but let's see what happens. So, I mean, I think knight e3 is not a bad move here, and then d5. I mean, I think basically black has equalised very easily. Anyway, this position, bishop g5. Of course, you want to double pawns. Nope, we won't have that. And now queen d2. Attacks that one. h6 thrown in. And now, as Fabiano said, white could trade and simply play knight e3. And it's close to equal, basically. Black is going to be able to force through d5. And yeah, maybe it's a little bit more comfortable for black, just because black's king is more secure than white's. Simple as that. But it can't be very serious. Anyway, the bishop came back to e3. And now d5. Excuse me a second, just a quick slurp of tea. So, rook f d1. Queen c7. And here, yeah, a lot of tension in the middle, and I find this a slightly odd decision. Levon played bishop c5 to exchange off that knight, but it's funny because that bishop seems to me such a key piece in White's position. Now I can understand why he didn't want to trade this, because that would release Black's pieces here. But White could wait. Queen c2. And things aren't so bad. Yes, those pawns can be doubled, but it's not so serious because White is always going to get counterplay on b7, and actually it's not really possible to attack that pawn on c4. So it basically balances out. And you never know, this bishop has some future. So bishop c5 I thought was a slightly strange decision from Aronian. And, you know, those dart squares, again, it comes down to the fact that these squares down towards the king are just a bit tender. And Black is better. I mean, this kind of pawn structure is so common from Sicilian positions, actually, with Black, where imagine you have a pawn on d6 and a pawn on e4, and Black breaks with d5. You see it time and again in Scheveningen's or Najdorf's. It's such a common scenario, and Sveshnikov's as well. And now this bishop has reached the long diagonal. Looking at that pawn on f3, which is a little bit sensitive. Again, I would like to cheat and just put that pawn back on g2. He might spot it. Here, if queen d6, White would very much like to exchange queens to just kind of, you know, calm things down a little bit. But queen b7 is an enormous problem. Not so easy to defend that, and there's also a rook d8 coming as well. So coming back here, after bishop c6, queen e3 from Aronian, rook a2 from Caruana, who said after the game he thought he played really well here. He said, I hope I'm not being immodest, but he was very pleased with himself after the game. That's a spoiler, I think. Sorry about that. I mean, in fact, yeah, it's still not completely clear. You know, what happens if queen takes pawn, rook takes bishop, and Black certainly has the initiative. Although, again, with best defense, White can probably defend that. But I think rook a1 is a very understandable move to exchange off that rook on the 7th rank. Knight d7 protects the pawn. And protects this one. You never know, the queen might be able to bounce in here somewhere. My computer likes rook a7 here, just to get a bit of counterplay. I sort of understand why Levon didn't want to do that, because the queen comes in, and yeah, it feels a bit tricky. You know, it's not quite clear what the rook is doing at the other end of the board on its own, but it seemed apparently it's safe enough. But bishop d3 played instead, and now Fabi takes the initiative. Again, absolutely typical from Sicilian positions, where you see this pawn duo marching down the board. Well, we've seen Magnus do this kind of thing recently. Very common scenario. And e4 takes, and knight e5. And Levon was now running really short of time. Fabiano was playing very, very quickly. Well, we saw him the other day playing against Vichy Anand, and he ran down the clock. Fabiano really should have put Anand away, but he used up too much time, got too complicated, and he missed a win in the classical game. But In this game in round 8, he seems to have learned his lesson, and he was just playing very practically, very quickly. It's the kind of thing that Magnus does so well. And Fabi seemed to have his form back today. In fact, with best play, White is still okay here. Rook f1 looks like it's good enough to defend. In fact, after the game, Fabiano was analysing this a little bit with Judith Polgar, and they couldn't quite crack it. And in fact, White is okay in this position. But it's tricky. And in practical terms, still very, very difficult for White. Levon played bishop d1. Now things are starting to look serious. Now he was obviously hoping to get, a nice blockade here. But, well, let's see what happens. If knight takes pawn, then this just doesn't work very well. Well, there's a couple of things, but actually simply setting up a pin here is fatal. Incredibly, White is still okay after knight g4, but it's very, very tricky. Anyway, that's another story. In practical terms, this is very difficult. Bishop e2 played, but knight f3 is really unpleasant. And here's the point, that if king g2, then knight d4, the king is on absolutely the worst square, of course, if that's taken. Then e3 check. And something gets taken here. And bishop takes, rook takes, this is the game. And basically, black is breaking through because this e-pawn is going to advance. And then the long diagonal opens, and this, well, it's carnage from this moment. So let's see a couple of variations. If rook a6, then simply queen b2 is incredibly strong. Let's have that on the board, actually. With the idea e3. If queen takes, then of course queen takes knight check and make next move. And otherwise, yeah, e3 is coming. Let's go back. So in the game, the rook is attacked. It moved to d1 and e3, so the blockade is broken and black's pieces flood in. If queen d8, we exchange, and there is no defense because if knight d3, e2, threatening to take the knight and make a queen, and no defense there at all. And even rook e8 is impossible because the bishop covers. Back we go. Knight g4 played. Queen e6, attacking the knight. A check. The king came up. The king completely safe. Now, it's a tale of two kings. Like I said, black's king is basically snug here with that nice pawn on g7, just protecting along the second rank. And look at white's king. These diagonals open, the second rank is open, and that is absolutely fatal for the king. Knight e5 played, and Fabiano played queen h3, and that was the final move of the game. If knight takes, bishop takes, and mate follows shortly. King completely safe here. There's another very sweet way to win that Fabi had seen, but he thought he'd be practical and just play queen h3. He could have played e2, as he pointed out himself, with this very cute idea. Check here, and queen h3, threatening mate, and if rook here, well, mate next move. Okay, I'll leave it in the final position of the game, queen h3. It's so interesting, isn't it, how, the other day we saw Fabiano just seemed lacking in confidence. And in this game today, he just turned things around completely and played really practically and had real self-belief, and it showed after the game. He was very pleased with himself, and rightly so. So this sets up a very intriguing game in the last round. Magnus has already won the tournament, but he faces Fabiano Caruana. There's a lot of honour, a lot of pride at stake in that game, so watch out for that. Thanks for watching.